Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Shane Johnson. I'm responsible for product marketing here at Snorkel. Once upon a time, in my early career, I was focused on engineering and architecture, and it was actually at Red Hat where I was kind of pulled to the dark side of marketing here in an effort to, have stronger conversations with developers and architects and kind of share, tips and learnings and recommendations from them. And ever since then, I spent my time in product marketing generally around, more technical products, databases, AI platforms, etc. But the real important person here is certainly Elena Boiarskaia, if I pronounce that right. Hopefully she'll correct me if I
Okay.
get it.
Mhm.
But super excited to have you join us today because you know a whole lot more about this than I ever will. So maybe I will pipe down for her for a minute and let you share a few things about yourself with everyone.
Thank you. Sounds great. I appreciate you inviting me over and you taking us through your background kind of resonates with me because this is my first foray into being part of a marketing team and helping with technical advocacy. So my background is math statistics and I've worked with customers as a data scientist for many, many years. So over a decade of experience of customer facing, solving use cases and delivering use cases. And most recently at Snorkel, I was the head of applied machine learning. And my new chapter now is to help out the marketing team and really talk about the technical aspects of Snorkel and how we work with customers to solve their use cases. So I'm really here now as a bridge between our technical teams and getting that out into the world. And I'm really excited to be here in that capacity.
We couldn't be more excited to have your support here.
Thank you.
So I guess that, the kind of the background for bringing us together here today is I understand that you were down in Florida last week or for a Gartner conference, and I heard that everything was pretty great down there. But for those that couldn't attend Gartner, maybe you want to give them just a little quick overview of what was happening.
Perfect. Yeah. So, well, thank you. First of all, I really loved partnering with you on the Gartner presentation. So, the Gartner conference, of course, was, represented a whole slew of AI, data science, data management companies. It was all about AI data. So, that was the theme of the conference. And what is that? And that was our presentation, right? What is AI ready data? And I had a great time delivering that talk because it really spoke to my experience. I've attended these conferences for many years now. So I've seen, it was just kind of like seeing old friends constantly, you're seeing these companies every year at these types of, at the big exhibit hall, and it's really fun and all the swag, which we had a lot of fun with. Um, and we had, of course, the pink socks with the snorkel logo, which we love. But the theme of the conference really resonated with kind of the struggle that I've experienced as a data scientist my entire career, which is AI ready data. It's been rebranded, right? So AI is the new brand for machine learning. Machine learning was the brand, but before it was statistics, right? So there was kind of like just new terms being thrown around, and it throws people off. And that's been kind of that was my talk. That was my talk for what is AI ready data and how do we make it? How do we build it? Um, and where do you need it and why? So we talked about, addressed it in terms of like we are building a machine learning algorithm. Now we're building an agentic system or some generative AI algorithm. The need remains to have the data set appropriate to create a good model because Gen AI still leverages your data if you want the Gen AI to be useful, good, etc. So I can go into that, but that was really the theme of the whole conference and exactly what kind of the use cases that came up we discussed.
Yeah, I should note, I saw on LinkedIn this morning, um,
Mhm.
well, one of the attendees had shared all of his favorite swag from the conference, hats, socks, plushies. We were the best sock apparently at Gartner. So
There was
we have that
somebody,
going for us. If all else fails, we are making awesome
we are
socks.
a great, we have a great future in socks. So we had a guy come over to the booth and say, I'm collecting all the socks. I'm on a side quest to get all the socks from the guy. It's a huge floor with all of these exhibitors. We were booth 925. I don't know how many booths there were, the number, but you can imagine. I mean, it was hundreds, right? If not thousands. And he definitely thought ours were the best
Love it. Love it.
from an
Uh,
expert.
I did want to go back to the AI data for
Mhm.
one moment. And part of my inspiration when I started thinking about how to shape this deck is I'm that person that tends to get stuck on the things people don't say. And so what I realize is we are always talking about, AI ready data, right? And in a more Gartner sense, I usually will just say AI data. It's so critical, right? If you're building a Gen AI system, you have to have the right AI data. But what I found, the more, I immerse myself in this, the more I realize no one's actually telling us what AI data physically is. It's kind of this amorphous, concept. And I think that's because, and again, I'm not a machine learning expert, but when I think about machine learning use cases for classification or extraction, there's really just two elements. There's some arbitrary data, whether it could be text, it could be an image, and then there's, this label applied to it. And so if
What
you
are we predicting?
ML data, you're probably saying, well, there's some arbitrary data and some label, and we're using that in some way, shape, or form. But I think when it comes to Gen AI data, there's a lot of more different flavors. I think in part because, correct me if I'm wrong, but when I think of, ML and predictive, the only real data you're typically concerned with is building that training data that is used to
100%.
create the model, right? And sure, maybe you have like a test and validation, splits as well. But Gen AI systems have many more components, and all of those components can benefit from data in different ways as well.
And they can be used as labeling systems as well, which is
They
really
can, they can. And so maybe, I guess I wanted to touch on, could you share a few examples, from that session you had, tell us
for
what,
sure.
give us an idea of what AI data is, or a couple
What
flavors.
is AI ready data? That is exactly the session, right? So, real quick to address your kind of thoughts, I think you're spot on, and that's partially what I touched on. So, a few years back, we were talking at the same Gartner conference, we were talking about featureization for training ML models. So, how do you extract features from your unstructured data to make them into a tabular data set that you can then feed into some sort of machine learning algorithm to make a prediction? So that was a bit more of a direct way to work with the data. And that was ML ready data, right? It has to be featureized. So AI ready data still has to have some component of it can be now unstructured. It doesn't have to be in a table, like it's a lot more free form, but it needs to have a component of what does good look like when Gen AI comes in, when a large language model comes in and starts to use it to answer a question. And this question could be anything. So we're not necessarily we don't have a direct label, but we're still looking to get an insight out of the data. And for us to tell the LLM what is a good insight is where we start to think about what is AI ready data. Like when I have a data set and it's completely unstructured text and it's a bunch of PDFs, and I want the LLM to swoop in and, be able to access these PDFs and give me an answer, and it could be any question that I ask it, right? How do I train the LLM to give me the right answer? The answer that my enterprise is looking for, the answer that's leveraging the right context. And I'm simplistically describing a rack system, right? But
Yeah.
it comes down to evaluating if this bot is able to actually use my data correctly and give me correct responses, right? Retrieval and generation. That's what a rack system stands for, right? So it's we still need to know what good looks like. Because before in building a predictive use case, we know what good looks like if we have a high area under the ROC curve. Like that was our metric or F1 score. If that's high, we're good, for
Yeah.
that's our benchmark. Like the benchmark was much easier. And now the benchmark could be nothing, right? But you don't want to put that in production because you don't know if it's going to be doing the thing you want it to do. Right. So without a
Yeah.
benchmark, you're not going anywhere.
Yeah. And I think a RAG is a good context for it. And maybe I think also just expanding the scope of what you might consider data. And so I think in our world, certainly there's that data that makes its way directly into an LLM through fine tuning. but then also recognizing that the context is data, right? It might be part of the physical model, but that's data that needs to be passed to the model. And even the prompt we could think of as
Oh,
data, right? If you're
100%.
building a
Yeah.
prompt template, this is a form of data. This is also passed to the model. But I think sometimes, we can almost be too simplistic and not realize that this prompt, even though it may seem like a simple thing, in practice, those prompts aren't necessarily so simple, right? In enterprise use cases.
Oh, I have a good example of that. We were working with a customer as at Snorkel. We were working with a big financial customer, and we actually built them a system that includes RAG and includes fine tuning, and we looked at prompt engineering. Prompt engineering alone was able to move us forward 17 points in terms of improvement of, what the benchmark was. So it was a huge, huge deal maker, because we game changer. That kind of like they were not going like they just put the prompt in and thinking, this is what we want, and when we tweaked it a little bit with a few template kind of choices, it like improved the output of the LLM. I mean, 17 points, that's huge, right? So it could be a huge game changer.
So I guess my next question, over the past few days this week, I'm sure you and the team had, a lot of opportunities to talk with folks who were, probably all in this similar situation of, AI, 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 right? We have to find a way to build valuable AI and get it to production to deliver on
Yes.
all this promise and all this hype. But like so many things, it's easier said than done. What were some of the challenges that they were facing, or obstacles, or just questions? What
Yeah.
was slowing them down from being able
Yeah.
to celebrate some amazing, AI assistant or co-pilot that's
This
running?
is This is so funny that you bring that up because every single person I spoke with, they had an agentic system already built. So this is where it's like, it's not hard to build one. It's kind of like before you had to be like, a data scientist, ML engineer to build a good data science model or ML model. No longer, everybody's doing it kind of thing. Like we all have one. And then what they were struggling with was, okay, now what? They all had this now what moment. And I'm talking, I spoke to probably hundreds of people at this conference, and they all were like, yes, we're experimenting with RAG. Yes, we have an agentic system. Yes, we have a chatbot. They all had something in place already because it's now okay. Data access is easier. They're able to they no longer rely on a data engineering team to structure the data for them to then be used for analysis, right? They already can just go direct and then just bolt on this agentic system on top of their data, which is phenomenal. I mean, it's a huge advancement. But then they were like, well, it's not doing what we want. It's definitely not giving the right answers. Where do we look next? And so obviously you have to evaluate the system at every stage, right? So evaluating the system of, is it retrieving the right context? Is it generating the right insights? Does it have the right, does it align with your organization? And obviously, if this is the prompt, asking the LLM to do what you actually want it to do, because you can tell the LLM, I want you to think like a financial advisor, or I want you to think like a professor. There's nuance to this, and it
Mhm.
does make a difference. So they were struggling with benchmarks. They didn't know what good looks like, which then brings us into evaluation. Because they're like, I know it's not quite what I want in production. I have all the pieces in place. Now what? So yeah, I can definitely talk more about that, but that's
No,
definitely number one.
it makes a lot of sense. Evaluation is certainly something I've been spending a lot of time with recently. And I was actually speaking with, a Gartner analyst the other day, and we ended up kind of going on our own little side quest here that, you know, I think until you spend, enough time in it, superficially, you can kind of approach it with a simple question like, is this generating a correct answer or not?
Yeah.
And I think what we found is that the definition of correct is not ubiquitous, right? If I pick 100, you know, Fortune 500 companies that are in different domains, right, in different businesses and different use cases, there's no singular definition of correct that they can all apply to find out is this the AI? And the
And
reason
that's a
that
good
is,
thing because that's what makes your enterprise unique.
Yes,
That's
and that's
why
what we
they're
touched on.
ideas.
Yeah, and I have to give him credit, I think, for this phrase, which I'm probably going to mangle a little bit, but I had said something to the fact that we're trying to encourage our customers to build evaluations, which kind of account for their own acceptance criteria, right? How does
Yes.
business define what's a good response? And then he said something effective. Well, what they really want to know is this AI, application doing what they want it to do? Which was
Mhm.
maybe the better question. Not is this response correct or not? Is it
So
doing
much
what
more
I
to
want
it
it
than
to
that.
do, right?
Mhm.
Based on my requirements and preferences and
Mhm.
responsibilities. And so that was kind of our fun little side chat that evaluation is so much more than I think like quantitative numbers or these
We
black.
no longer rely on that singular 0.95. That's pretty good.
Yes.
Ship it. You know?
Yeah, well, and that was the other
Yeah.
thing we went on a little bit is we were talking about, and I'll be curious to get your take on this. We were talking about evaluation, and for those that aren't familiar with Stoker Flow, we were talking about data slices. And the way I think about it is let's say you have an AI co-pilot. Let's use an assistant, right? Helping out with the customer support team. No differently than calling a 1-800 number. You're immediately categorized, right? Are you calling because you have a lost or stolen card? You want to make a payment? You want to check your balance? These are what I would think of as like the business context for that AI
And
assistant.
you self-categorize when you call in, right?
Yeah, and then yeah, exactly. And then
Self-label.
and then press 1 through 9 for this, and it
Mhm.
keeps going. And I was kind of explaining that our perspective is that we're trying to find out not kind of the totality of is the AI behaving the way we want it to, but within certain areas where is it not behaving? Because if it's 90% acceptable, that sounds so great on the surface. Uh, but what's that other 10%, right? Is that
What it turns out that there's a whole slice of use cases that's just not performing at all, right? So
yeah, and
maybe
it could be a
50%.
critical slice. Like if I
Yeah.
were to carve that up and my system was 90% accurate, but then I found out that the 10% where it was failing, that was payment processing, that
Yeah.
might be a fairly big concern for me. I probably would not
Yeah.
go to production with that. And here's my
Exactly.
question for you, and this is his hypothesis that I thought was kind of fascinating, is he kind of flipped it, and his perspective was, I don't know that businesses want to necessarily see the performance in every single category. What I've seen is that businesses already come with a specific category or two, and those are almost
Mhm.
all they're concerned about.
Yeah.
They kind of say, listen, we
Gotcha.
know this thing's
Yeah.
going to answer thousands of different types of questions, but here's a list of the 100, right? Or the types that we are hyper focused on
Sure.
that they must
Yeah.
be 100% accurate. Like we can tolerate failure everywhere else, but this segment that's critical to our business, this has to be at 100%.
And I've seen, so this maps directly to before we had a machine learning use case and we had the data points that 100% must be met correctly. And this is, I used to work in the financial industry and we used to build market regulation models. So like regulating the financial market and like identifying fraud. Well, there are certain use cases we wanted to, or not use cases, but fraudulent cases that we wanted to make sure that this algorithm caught, right? So back then, like we knew exactly what good looks like. What you're describing again is the enterprise coming to you and saying, hey, I know what good looks like. I need these 100. That's already a data set. That's a data set right there that's labeled, which is I have my prompt, context, response triplet that tells me like this is what I want out of this LLM. Do more of that. And we can really fly with that, right? Because you need to come, this LLM, you can't just expect it to do everything to know what you want. I mean, we ask a lot of these systems, and out of the box, they do not perform in any of the verticals that we work with, right? Finance, telco, in it just doesn't work because it doesn't know your data, it doesn't know what you want, it knows Wikipedia really well. Right, so it's going to answer the questions just like whatever you have in the public internet. Well, when you build it for the enterprise, you have to reference your data, right? You have, if you're doing payment processing, well, it's going to come out of and your enterprise's rules and regulations and how you do things. So that's super, it needs to be super custom. And so if an enterprise already knows what they're looking for out of this bot, it's a fantastic start. That's what we need, right? To make it good. That's exactly what we need. And I was going to tell you about a quick aside, like for a couple of use cases, with my my team, my applied machine learning team, we did LLM as a judge, which is super popular because it's like, well, I have this LLM, it puts out something, it generates an answer. I need to go through these responses and get and figure out if they're any good or not. Everybody's on board with that, but then they're using other LLMs to verify that these are good using a prompt, right? So LLM as a judge needs a better prompt to kind of go through these responses and judge them exactly as it sounds. And then we would spot check that with some SMEs, right? So the subject matter experts in the enterprise would spot check the LLM as a judge, and we would compare the responses we got from human annotators with the LLM as a judge. And we got like 30% agreement. So that's concerning, right? Because we know I'm inclined to trust the human annotators more, but the LLM as a judge gives us a complete and consistent response. So we don't know that the human annotators are very consistent with their judgment. We know that the LLM is going to be more consistent and it's going to be more thorough because it's going to go through all of the data. But we have human annotators who are obviously making a judgment call. They have a mood, they have all sorts of variables happening in their lives. So but we need to agree to some degree. So it's kind of like a new metric that we need to think about is like, do we agree with this LLM? Do the humans agree with the LLM as a judge? And that's one of the metrics that we're thinking about for production purposes, because you need to kind of keep manipulating these dials. And then when you have this, 100-question data set that humans created that are like, this is gonna, this is in a regulated industry, and this is what we're going to go through with our audit trail, right? Like that's super important to explain. Like this is how we think about what good looks like. And then using these 100, if the LLM as a judge is not aligning, that's a problem. So there's already out of the box, like we have annotator agreement with LLM as a judge agreement, and then we can take it further and then see, performance and evaluation of the prompt context response triplet, and so on. So I can
I mean, it
talk
makes
about
sense.
for
Yeah,
hours.
if you're relying on an evaluation, to kind of serve as your gateway to production, I have to assume that you have to be able to put trust into it, right? And it needs to give you that confidence. And if your LLM judge is wildly disagreeing with your own internal experts, that's probably not giving you the confidence
It's
needed to
not
move
it's
forward.
not a good look.
Yeah. I need to figure out how to use that more for AI. That's not a good look for
It's not a good look. Yeah, your LLM as a judge has to agree. So that means you have to train the LLM as a judge too, right? I mean, you can throw any LLM as a judge, but it's like then it's going to come from the prompt or whatever it is that needs to align with what's important to you as an enterprise. So there needs to be this alignment
So
built
I have
in.
one more question for you. This one's probably going to be a little bit random, and I'm using you as my sounding board to see if I'm
Okay.
looking right. So I think a lot about kind of the application of AI data, and the three things when I think of choices in my head is what you add to the prompt, what you add to the context, and what you actually fine tune the model on. My leaning right now is that knowledge should be done through context. That is probably not the right way to think about training your model to incorporate, enterprise data and domain knowledge. That context is the best place for that. That things like, um, say, rules, requirements, directives, guidelines,
Mhm.
those things might be a better fit for the prompt. And that we think about fine-tuning LLMs, would it be safe to say that the focus there is really on behavior? So given the right knowledge, given the right instructions, is this responding a way that behaves as one of our own
Uh,
SMEs would, right? And
Sounds like I would want it to sound
yeah,
representing my company.
right, right. Am I picturing that the right way, do you think? Or is
Yeah,
that
I mean, the only
oversimplifying
thing I
that?
would add that's a great way to think about it. The thing I would add is, when you're thinking about the response, so this is where you would fine tune the LM if it's not giving you either a polite response or
Mm,
a correct response. So you can break that up into hundreds of categories if you wanted to, right? So it doesn't have to be. So I'm not talking about slices now. I'm talking about literally different facets of how you think about what a good response looks like, which could be correctness, but it also could be, again, I bring up politeness. It could be conciseness. You can have 7 different ways that you evaluate the response. And it's not just, is it correct? Because if it's factually correct and it's pulling the right prompt, like what you said, but it's not, it doesn't sound, it sounds too casual, or it's giving me so much more extra information that I don't want. I'm not putting that in production. It's still a showstopper. And then you can judge like how much of a showstopper is politeness versus correctness, but I would argue both are showstoppers,
Yeah.
right? So you
Well,
have to know what it breaks up into.
yeah, and I think that kind of, maybe subconsciously this is bringing us back to kind of full circle when we started this conversation around AI data that, as we got deeper into evaluation here, when you're learning that there's failures or issues, you have to act on those. And
Yeah,
really
no,
that, acting to correct those failures
yeah,
is ultimately an act of applying AI data in some way, shape, or form to some component in the system to
love that. Yeah.
make those corrections. So yeah, we come back to AI data, excuse me. Maybe I'll just finish here. Do you have any parting thoughts from the last few days in
Yeah,
Orlando and immersed in the world of AI and enterprise? What would you like to share with everyone before we wrap up?
yeah, I think, yeah, what do I do now? Again, bringing it back to like the theme that I've noticed with a lot of people I spoke to, they built a RAG system. Um, it's okay. Like, what do I do now? What do I do with that? How do I evaluate it, right? It really comes down to where do I build trust in the system for me to go to production? And really, if you're in finance or you're in healthcare, you're going to have to go through a review board and you're going to have to prove that I mean, I don't feel comfortable putting in AI agent without some sort of, you know, review. And in their cases, there's an audit trail and there's, governance that you have to go through. So what does that look like? And so having those clear evaluation metrics, but evaluation metrics for all of those different components is the key. But that's where you have to, you have to do a lot of thinking about what that looks like for your company. And really, you mentioned RAG, right? So we have retrieval. If we give it the right context, it should work. Well, people are experimenting with like long context models. So what if we don't need a retrieval algorithm anymore? Like we don't need context. We just give it the entire document. We've been doing a lot of benchmarking, and it doesn't quite work like that. So I think context is still really important. So giving the right context, because you can easily pull out the context that has all of the words that the LLM thinks is required to answer this question, but it has nothing to do with what what you're asking, right? So there's a ton of examples like that, just like in our presentation. Um, so all of those components just require some evaluation. And that, again, correctness of did they pull the correct context? Is the prompt doing what we want? Is the is the generation of the output correct? Is it polite? All of those are metrics. All of those are then benchmarks that you can improve upon. So the now what component is solved by, okay, here's where I'm starting. I've evaluating, 10 different things. And then I'm gonna zero in and look, this is where my error is coming from. This is the worst performing piece of it. I'm gonna focus my efforts there because that creates a roadmap for your team to then go in and continue to develop our data to be more AI ready, for lack of a better term, right? So it starts with a benchmark and evaluation would be my parting thought.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Elena, for joining us. I can't overestimate, how great it is to have someone with your level of expertise and knowledge in this space to help us as we navigate this territory. And thank you to everyone who's watching. This is the first time, Elena, I have had a chance to sit down and have a conversation like this, but I don't think it's been the last. So
I
hopefully,
hope not.
hopefully we won't have to wait long and we'll do it again. And we'll, of course, share that with all of you.
Yeah, that's really fun. Thank you so much, Shane.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.